Check it out and listen. Hear about a show you won't be missing. Something you should believe. When it comes to rocking, we achieve. Such a pleasure for you to see. What's the show? I hear you shout. Rock and metal is what I'm talking about. Rock and metal invasion. Rock and metal invasion. Rock and metal invasion. Rock and metal invasion. Now stop, check it out and listen. Hear about a show you won't be missing. Something you should believe. When it comes to rockin', we achieve. Such a pleasure for you to see. What's the show? I hear you shout. Rock and metal is what I'm talking about. Rock and metal invasion. Rock and metal invasion. Rock and metal invasion.
Hi, welcome to Rock and Metal Invasion. My name is Steve. Coming up on the show today, I'm doing my top 10 nearly one and done hair metal albums. What do I mean by nearly? Well, I'm talking about those bands who we might consider hair metal, hard rock, heavy metal, released in the 80s, 83 to around about 92. And they released just one album in that period, but then also maybe they also released an EP, or some of these bands did record a second album that then didn't end up being released until many years later, probably because it was recorded just during that time where grunge was becoming popular, becoming the popular thing. And so record companies were like, sorry, but this kind of sound is just not happening anymore. Forget about it, guys. It's all over. So the album gets shelved, but then eventually gets, released maybe on an independent or self-released many years later. So there's some examples of that. And you might be surprised because you might have thought, I thought that was a one and done band, but actually there are other releases, either an EP or a follow-up album, second album that you might not know about. So this kind of follows on, of course, from I did my top 10 one and done hair metal albums, and there were many albums that didn't qualify just because of this thing, because my qualifying factor was if they had released an EP, then they weren't one and done, or if they had released an unreleased sort of an album that had not been released but then was released later on, then you weren't one and done as far as my criteria was concerned. So it's pretty strict. I tried to be anyway, as much as possible on the one and done. And I had some honorable mentions as well. I'll have some today also, and I'll discuss, well, exactly, why is it not one and done? Was it an EP? Was it a unreleased album? In some cases, it's both. They had an EP and they also had an unreleased album. And then, I'll start off with some honorable mentions, and then I'll get into my sort of top 10. And a lot of these bands too were discussed or were mentioned in the comments. Thank you for those people who left comments in my original top 10 one and done hair metal albums. So some of these will come up. All right, so let's just get into some of the honorable mentions. So these were in consideration for my, top 10 nearly one and done hair metal albums. First up, we've got Gypsy Queen. So this is actually a album by, it's got two female singers fronting the band, and they have only released the one album. Now, they did also release an album called Cellmates, slightly different lineup, but also had the two twin sisters as the vocalists. But they also did release an EP, and that is called the Snarl and Stripes EP. It's like a 4-track EP, so not completely one and done. This is pretty good, produced by Jack Douglas, and Love is Strange. There's a music video for that. I've talked about this band and album before. Pretty good, but it's not going to make my top 10. Another honorable mention is UK band Kiss of the Gypsy. This is pretty good. This came out, though, in 1992. So, really late to the game. It's that sort of bluesy hard rock, 70s inspired even hard rock. I know that the singer of the band, Tony Mitchell, is quite inspired, I think, by Paul Rodgers, that sort of singer. And so interesting though that this I would have thought was one and done, but they did release an EP, believe it or not, 30 years later. So to sort of mark the 30th anniversary, there's a 30th anniversary EP that the band have put out. So it's actually it's a new recording. Although interestingly enough, they've got a new vocalist. So they haven't replaced the vocalist Tony Mitchell, but I think it's all the other members are there for the EP. And the vocalist Tony Mitchell, actually, he's been quite busy. He's put out quite a few solo albums over the years, and he even put out. This is one of those deals where there's a bit of a issue perhaps with the name, because he's also put out a album under the name Tony Mitchell's Kiss of the Gypsy. Both actually sound really good. I've checked them out online. I like. There's a music video for Kiss of the Gypsy and a track from their EP, which is there's a music video, a good song too. But also, Tony Mitchell's Kiss of the Gypsy sounds pretty good also. Of course, he was the vocalist, so he's quite a distinctive part of the band. But these guys can play, and there's some good songs on this album, and also some good songs, from what I've heard, on the albums that have come out quite recently that are new recordings. But it didn't make my top 10, but I wanted to mention that one. Another interesting one is this one here. This is Kill for Thrills and their album Dynamite from Nightmare Land. So it's not going to make my top 10, but it's an interesting release. So I guess what's interesting about it is it has Gilby Clarke, who goes on to be in Guns N' Roses. He's the guitar player and lead vocalist as well. You've also got Todd Muscat. So he's a bass player and also is the brother of Brent from Faster Pussycat. Yeah, so there's some connection there to Faster Pussycat, and it's a similar kind of a sound. Again, I think probably influenced or in that same sort of family of hair metal that you might call sleaze metal, street metal, that Guns N' Roses would come from. But yeah, Kill for Thrills, Dynamite from Nightmare Land, and they had an EP called Commercial Suicide, is what they called it. I think it might have come out prior to this, and there might be a song from the EP that's on here, but it also had some non-album tracks on it. So that's why it's not one and done. They did do an EP. All right, now this one again, not the top 10, but honorable mention. And this is one where there's no EP, but they had a album that was recorded and then not released until much later on. So this is King of the Hill. So they're kind of that funky metal, funk metal, hair metal type influence. And because that's the thing, isn't it? With hair metal, there's lots of different sort of sub-genres under that. Or not that, of course, hair metal's a genre. Of course, it's more a term, a category. But there were lots of bands that had quite different sounds that we still might call or put into the hair metal category. And King of the Hill had that funk metal kind of extreme kind of. I guess we're doing that sort of sound a little bit as well at the time and having some success. But yeah, just one album on a major label, but they did record another album, and I think the second album was produced by Howard Benson as well. So this one's produced by Howard Benson. They've got some big names on their second album as well, but it didn't get released, and then it did get released quite a few years later on. And it's an interesting one too, because there's kind of a couple of released albums that have been released since this one, but they both seem to be pretty much the same thing, just a whole lot of leftover recordings or recordings that were recorded for the second album. But they have actually, from what I've heard, they have actually reformed and been playing live a little bit, so that's pretty cool. For me, the best song is Roses on this album. Not a big fan. That funky hair metal thing didn't really catch on with me that much, but I do like Roses. And yeah, like I say, apart from the fact that they did record an album that never got released until much later on, this was one and done. All right, one that was mentioned on my in the comments of my top 10 one and done hair metal albums, and also I know Dan from Off the Charts has mentioned it when he did his version of that show as well, is Black Eyed Susan. So Electric Rattlebone. So one reason I didn't mention it, well, number one, it wouldn't make my top 10 anyway. This is very much like that sort of, it's kind of very close to what the Black Crowes were doing at the time. Yeah, it's quite a departure. So there's Dizzy Dean Davidson from Britney Fox. This is his new band. and it's quite different. It's definitely quite different. Not really my kind of thing, but it also isn't completely one and done, because what happened is, I think around 92, this one probably came out around 91, yeah, on Polygram. Um, they did start demoing songs for a new album that then even got released on a cassette. You can get the cassette, that must be super rare, of course, but and it was called Just a Taste, and it's almost like a full album. So it's kind of available. And then what happened too, I think it's around 2019, Bad Reputation, who do a lot of reissues, they reissued this album, and then also reissued as part of it, I think it might be a 2 CD package, they had Just a Taste as part of that package as well. So you basically get 2 albums. But so I wanted to mention that, Black Eyed Susan and Electric Rattlebone. But yeah, doesn't make my top 10 of nearly one and done hair metal albums. All right, last one before I get into my top 10. It's the band called Reckless, No Frills. And I think they probably didn't do themselves any favors. I get that the idea is that the album has, the album cover has no frills, but it almost really, it just isn't memorable. Contains one album. That's all it pretty much says. It's got the no frills mark there. But if you go to the back, you can kind of see they've got a bit of a hair metal look. It's an 87, I think, release on Atlantic. So, I don't know. It just, the songs for me aren't that catchy, but there is a music video for Nitty Gritty if you want to check that out. And they were produced by JJ and Mark Mendoza from Twisted Sister. So they had some, good names there. Twisted Sister, I guess at the time, probably weren't as popular as what they had been, but still. And the reason they're not one and done is because they then did they did record an album, a follow-up album. I think it's called Disorderly Conduct, and it was released. It was recorded around 1990, but then wasn't released, and then it's come out many years later. I haven't really checked that out. A lot of these ones where there's a follow-up album that isn't released until many years later, I don't usually have those, so I can only just talk about them. I can't show them, but usually I've got the original, the first one. So I've got the Reckless one, the first No Frills album, but there is a second one. Check it out if you're interested. It's called Disorderly Conduct. Sometimes the follow-up albums, so the album that was recorded, they're not released, and then is released many years later. It's usually only on CD, and sometimes in quite limited quantities, and sometimes they're quite rare and quite hard to get now. All right, so let's get into my top 10. So this is my top 10 one and done hair metal albums by bands who weren't quite one and done. So they did actually release either a follow-up album that was sort of initially unreleased, or they had an EP. So this first one, coming in at number 10, is a band called Skin and Bones. Not a Pretty Sight is the name of the album. It's pretty cool. It's pretty good. Very typical hair metal, of course. The Skin and Bones, like Guns N' Roses, that using that sort of same kind of thing with the Resurrection Love. That's a really good song. That's my favorite song off the album. The rest is okay. It's fairly generic, I guess. For its time, you can see they've totally got the hair metal look. Produced by Andy Taylor from Duran Duran. He was doing quite a bit of production work around this time. Of course, he was also doing solo work. I'm not sure if he was doing anything with Duran Duran at the time. The band may have not been together, or he may have left Duran Duran at that time. Co-produced by Mike Fraser. He's worked a lot with AC/DC, of course. And the reason it's not one and done is they did do an EP that was released around 1992. Really super hard to get. Look on Discogs. It's just a cassette, I think. So not easy to get, but you can get. They then did they're calling it like a compilation, and basically it's got the EP and the songs from here. I think it's called Speakeasy, but it's like a compilation. So you can get that EP in one sort of big compilation on CD. But so you got Jim Bones. He's the lead guitar. You got Johnny Vamp. He's the lead vocalist. This guy here, Steve Match, I think he's the bass player. Sadly, he got shot by police around, I don't know, I think it's like 2010, something like that. He was like in his house. His flatmate called the police saying he's got a gun. Police turn up. He's holding what looks like a gun. He gets shot. I don't know the full details, but that's a bit of a sad ending for him. But that's about all I can say really about these guys. But if you didn't know about them, worth checking out. It's not on a major label, really. I mean, Equinox, not really that familiar with them, but yeah. And I remember checking that when I checked this out, not back in the day, but around the '90s, I think it was sometime. I didn't. It was just one of those blind buys, but of course, I only had to see the back cover and go, "Oh yeah, I got to check these guys out." So yeah, and just straight away, "Resurrection Love" was my go-to song. All right, so that was number 10. Number 9, this band got mentioned heaps in my um, one and done top 10 hair metal albums or bands, and it's Cats in Boots. It's a little bit like Skin in Bones, isn't it? But they actually use in, not just in. Cats in Boots, Kicked and Clawed, and yeah, it's not. I'm not going to say it's one and done because they did do an EP called Demonstration that was released only in Japan. It was pretty much basically demo songs that end up being album tracks on this album. But there are some songs that, not many, but there are some songs I think that aren't actually on this album. So I'm going to count that as an EP that, so it means it's not completely one and done. And then there's also something from around 93 to 95 of sort of recordings between the guitarist and the vocalist, but it's Joe Alias, of course, and it's Japanese guitarist as well. So that's, I think, a bit of a compilation of recordings. Maybe they got back together. I'm not sure. It's interesting it says 93 to 95 because I know after this, Joe Alice has been in a few bands actually, but I think he then hooks up with the guys or some guys from various bands actually, like Frankie Benelli, I know, is on drums. Anyway, he hooks up with some guys and forms a band called Heavy Bones. And that was another band also that got mentioned on my one and done hair metal top 10. But I don't have that album, and it's not bad. I like the 4 a.m. song, the song 4 a.m., but I don't have it. Good, cool music video too. It's almost like when they've filmed the music video, it's almost as though there's no cuts in it. It's pretty clever. But the album cover is very not the typical hair metal album cover, and I think I may have seen it from time to time back in the day, or even when it was easy to find those kind of albums in the '90s. May have seen it and not even realized it was a hair metal album or had hair metal guys in it. And I, obviously I've heard it since then and haven't been a great rush to pick it up. But like I say, I do like the 4 a.m. So thank you for those people who mentioned it. It's a good band to mention. They're definitely one and done. And these guys nearly one and done, but I'm going to count the EP. But anyway, they do make number 9 on my top 10 nearly one and done hair metal albums. All right, coming in now at number 8. This is the band called McQueen Street. So yeah, this is not an easy one to get on vinyl. And I know that recently it's been released unofficially, but if you want the official copy, which I kind of like to have, then that's not easy to get. But "Woman in Love," I think that was a single, and there's quite a good ballad on here too called where is it? Time. Yeah, that's a really good song. That could have been. I think there's a music video for that one as well. Yeah, really good, solid album. Interesting. This band I think it was formed by 2 brothers. So I think it might be David and Chris Welsh. Oh, sorry, Derek and Chris Welsh. So Chris is on drums and Derek is the lead vocalist. And I think that's Chris there, and that's Derek. Yeah. So they're the brothers. Sadly, Chris, the drummer, he died of some sort of illness, like around 93, 94, something like that. So, but the reason they're not one and done, they did put out their unreleased second album quite a long time after they had recorded it. I think it got recorded around 1993. Pretty solid album. I've heard it online, and quite similar actually to that. But of course, I guess with the way the music was going at the time, yeah, it just didn't get a release. But yeah, really good. Don't get confused either, because I was reading about Chris Welsh, and I was like, is he the drummer from Died Pretty? But that's a different drummer. His name is also Chris Welsh, and he's also having some health issues right now, but he's still alive. So don't get confused there. Died Pretty drummer Chris Welsh is still alive, although he does have some health issues if you Google his name. But yeah, he's still alive. But this is the Chris Welsh from McQueen Street. He sadly passed away in 1993. But Discogs, you need to update that because when you click on Chris Welsh for this band, it takes you to the Died Pretty drummer. Anyway, yeah, so McQueen Street. So what are they? They are number 8. So now we're up to number 7. It's actually pretty close. Pretty hard to call these the sort of my upper top, 7, 8, 9, 10. Pretty close to pretty even actually, I think. But I decided to go with for number 7. I decided to go with Kik Tracee and No Rules. So the reason that they are not one and done is because they released, and I do actually have this one, have it on CD. They released this Field Trip EP, which is brilliant. It's like, for me, this is a lot better than this full-length album, which was produced by Dana Strum. I quite like his production, actually. It's a bit different. It's kind of good. But Stephen Shiro, I think is his name. He's the vocalist. Nearly became the singer for Motley Crue, and then nearly became the singer for Velvet Revolver. So he's had a few close calls with, becoming famous, super famous. But in the end, it didn't quite happen. Kik Tracee, though, great band. This one here has got production by Chris Goss, who goes on to, produce stuff for Caius and, Masters of Reality is his band as well. This is really good, and I like it. I like this so much. Although you can't get this on vinyl, I did pick up because you can get it you can get 2 of the songs on vinyl. So I got this In Trance promo. So it's got In Trance and Blood Brothers. It's just like, it's got nothing. It's just black cover, but so I do have 2 of those songs on vinyl, but I love the whole EP to be on vinyl if possible. So, but there we go. So Kik Tracee and the album No Rules. That's coming in at number 7. All right, so coming in now at number 6, I'm going to go with female fronted, and I really loved this album back in the day. Great music videos. Femme Fatale, so they're self-titled. Lorraine Lewis, of course, on vocals, and Waiting for the Big One, I think, is a great song. They didn't actually write that one. I think they got an outside songwriter for that one, but Falling in and Out of Love, I think there's a music video for that one as well. And it's not one and done though, because they did put out a second album, One More for the Road. So that, again, it's one of those situations where they recorded an album and then it just didn't get released, and was released many years later. And they've actually, I think, quite recently just released a demos and live album as well, which you can check out. But and of course Lorraine Lewis was briefly, a year or 2, I guess, at least, in Vixen. So she was the vocalist in Vixen. And also Femme Fatale also was an all-female band for a while that she was fronting. So I'm not quite sure what her next move is going to be. But anyway, that's number 6 on my nearly one and done hair metal bands, or hair metal albums. Yeah, it's a good one. All right. Next one. This is number 5, Alias. So I've talked about this band before. Really good sort of, I think people would still put it in the, could be in the hair metal category, but it's more in that sort of AOR, sort of hard rock, definitely not super heavy. Of course, they had a big hit with More Than Words Can Say, but there are some good rocking songs on here. Haunted Heart particularly, that's a really good song. But some good rocking songs actually. This reminds me a little bit of like Bad English. It's very similar to that release that came out around about similar sort of time, similar sound. And this band sort of came from the ashes of a band called Sheriff, and who'd had a surprise hit after many years after the album had been released. But they did do a second album. So again, it's one of those situations where, and what's surprising is I'm sure this has gone platinum. I mean, they had a massive, More Than Words Can Say, probably still gets played on radio. It was a big hit. So you'd think, well, they'll get a follow-up album, surely. But and they recorded it, but it never got released. And the vocalist is really good. Freddie Kersey, I think is his name. He went on, I think, and did some solo albums. But the album that they recorded, which did eventually get released, called Never Say Never. It didn't get released at the time, but it's pretty solid too. Some good songs on there. You can get it on CDs, not a vinyl version of it, but I don't have a copy of it. But there's some good songs on there. So anyway, that's number 5 on my almost what am I saying? Nearly one and done hair metal albums. All right, number 4. Now this one is quite AC/DC inspired hair metal. There are a few bands that had a bit of AC/DC inspiration when them, with the hair metal sort of sound. And this is Johnny Crash and Neighborhood Threat. Really good stuff. The vocalist here is Vicky James Wright. He was briefly in Tokyo Blade, UK new wave of British heavy metal band. But yeah, so many good songs on here. I really like Hey Kid. There was a music video for that. But Guns N' Roses, I guess there's a bit of Guns N' Roses / AC/DC influence here. Tony Platt is the producer. Sounds really good from start to finish. Real solid stuff. Really good album. So it's just so good, solid album. I'm gonna make number 4 on my list, but it's only nearly because they did put out an album called Unfinished Business many years later. And of course, I guess it was given that title, for a reason, because it was like something they had recorded, hadn't been released. So yeah, Unfinished Business, I suppose, to put that out. I've heard that, haven't got a physical copy of it, but I've heard it. Yeah, it's not, I don't think it's as good, but maybe it's just because I haven't listened to it. I had a physical copy of it, really listened to it as much. But yeah, love this one. So yeah, that's number 4, Johnny Crash and Neighborhood Threat. Okay, it's Threat. So we're into my top 3 of nearly one and done hair metal albums. And coming in at number 3 is a UK band. There's not many UK bands that, I guess, compared to the States, of course. The States had the majority of the hair metal bands, I think, that at least had success, or the more well-known ones. But this is Jagged Edge and Fuel for Your Soul. So this basically is a bit of a project. I think Mikey Gray is the main sort of guy here. He goes on to form a band called Skin, which I think probably had more success than Jagged Edge. But that's in quite good management. They were sort of looked after by the guys that look after Iron Maiden, Sanctuary Management. So they had the potential to be successful. I think being from the UK was something a little bit different as well. They had more of that sort of bluesy hard rock sound, but not too bluesy. Still quite a good tough hard rock sound. Yeah, Mikey Gray is a really good guitar player, and they've got this guy Matt Alfonsetti. I don't think he was the original vocalist. I think, in fact, for a while there, Jagged Edge had a female fronting them, and from demos and so forth. But they settled with him, and yeah, he's great. I mean, he goes on to form a band called Skin Trade later on. He's done some solo stuff, I think, as well. And Andy Robbins also, the bass player, he also goes, I think, on to form Skin with Mikey Gray. And this guy here, Fabio De Rio, he plays with Bruce Dickinson on his solo album, and probably tours with him, I think, as well. So, and there was that Iron Maiden connection there also. But not quite one and done though, because they did put out, and I think the EP came out before the album, Trouble, and it does have some songs that are on the album, but also some songs that aren't. So, and it's not as good. I don't think the songs are as good here as the ones on Fuel for Your Soul. It's got You Don't Love Me, which is pretty sure that's on. Yeah, that's on here as well. But also on this, the standout song for me is Out in the Cold. It's a really good song. Check that one out. But yeah, there's some other good ones as well that I really like. Liar, the opening song, that's really good. But yeah, just one and done apart from that EP. All right, so now we're into just the final 2. So interesting, actually, because the second one is a New Zealand band. So this is a band called Push Push. So obviously I'm in New Zealand, so I guess that's probably a big part of the fact that I like this album, like this band, but they are nearly one and done because they released this in probably it was around 1992, yeah, and it's called A Trillion Shades of Happy. This is the original release on vinyl, limited edition of 1,000. It did get reissued a few years ago. This is the original release on vinyl, not easy to get. Tripping is one of the singles from the album. That was a big hit here in New Zealand. But they had other singles like What My Baby Likes, and Song 27 is a really good song, really well worth checking out. Mikey Havoc, he's the vocalist. he becomes a bit of a sort of a TV celebrity for a while here in New Zealand. But yeah, probably for a lot of people watching this channel, watching this episode, they may not be that familiar with this band, but worth checking out. They're not quite one and done though, because they actually reformed a few years ago and put out an EP called Talk to Me. I think it had like 5 songs on it, maybe. I'm not sure exactly. I don't have it. But yeah, so not quite one and done. I did actually go and see them too. You know, I think it was about 5 years ago. They reformed and played a concert, and it was really good too. Really enjoyed it. But they've been a bit quiet since then, so I'm not sure if that's it. But they're not quite one and done, but they do make number 2 on my nearly one and done hair metal albums list. All right, and what's number 1? Well, I think I talked about this band because I just wanted to mention the fact that it didn't quite qualify for my top 10 one and done hair metal albums, but if it did qualify, it would have been very close to number 1, if not number 1. I really like this album. The band I'm talking about is Hurricane Alias and Tear the House Down. So this one's going to be my number 1, nearly one and done. And if I'd done this a few years ago, it would have qualified as one and done. But they did actually put out a little EP, not that long ago, but it's called Gotta Be Real, I think it is, and it's got 6 tracks on it. But yeah, only came out 2 or 3 years ago, so or quite recently even. So it's now not a one and done, but this is really good. I actually like the ballad Dream Girl. I actually quite like that one, but yeah, Too Late, Need a Lover, really good. Wild, Young and Crazy, there's a music video for that. That's good. It's very typical hair metal, but they do it really well. And yeah, so yeah, that's going to be my number 1 nearly one and done hair metal album. All right, so that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, make sure you hit the thumbs up. Leave a comment. What are some nearly one and done hair metal albums that I haven't mentioned yet? Maybe there's some that you like that you think I should have mentioned, or that you just like to tell me about. I'd love to know. So leave that information in the comments. If you haven't subscribed and you enjoy this type of content, make sure you hit the subscribe button, and I'll be back next week. All right, we'll catch you later. See ya.